What is an adult? It's a question that crossed my mind a couple of times. I didn't notice any change moving into my 20s, no particular change moving into my 30s. It wasn't until I experienced a major trauma around age 40, then discovered trauma PTSD as a paradigm, and then began working towards post-traumatic growth and trying to piece my identity back together, that it really struck home that, one, there'd never been a time when I felt that I transitioned from adolescence to adulthood. It didn't change when I built my first house at 23. It didn't change when I started a company. There was no big psychological shift. And nobody in all of the institutions of parenting and school and therapy and in the media that I've consumed has ever explained exactly what an adult is. So it's a useful question, just as a little bit of context. And for an answer, what is an adult? Because it's clearly not a grown-up, meaning you have physiological age that goes 0 to death and then stops. But then you have psychological age, emotional age, and mental age. And this is an important kind of thing to be aware of because one's emotional age is often not one's physical age. And this is the case particularly when traumatic dissociation occurs. The part of the self that dissociates freezes in time, and so it doesn't mature. If you re-trigger a traumatized person, they often suddenly become 4 years old, 6 years old, emotionally. And they still have the data available to the pattern organizing brain or the rational brain. So the rational brain is developing and gathering data along with the body. But the emotional age is the part of the self that moves from childhood to adolescence, but not necessarily to adulthood, and not necessarily to adolescence. We know that many children, with learning or developmental challenges may never go beyond 5, 6, or 7. Someone with Down syndrome, for example. Whether or not they learn things, they're not developing emotionally. And so being an adult is partly a physical experience, it's partly a mental experience, but the feeling of being an adult is definitely an emotional experience and doesn't occur if one stops developing or if one identifies emotionally primarily as someone younger. So how do we look at, where would we turn to develop a model for what an adult is? I mean, the cult decides that a body is an adult, in some cases at the age of 18, in some cases at the age of 16, in some cases at the age of 21. But pretty much all the cults in the world that use age to delineate adulthood, often in criminal and legal context, it's somewhere between 16 and 21. However, in my experience, going to age 21 did not change anything as a feeling. I was still kind of feeling exactly the way I was feeling at 15 or 16, other than that my outer environment was different. So in order to answer the question, what does it mean to be an adult? The first thing to look at is where we fit in life's program. Because according to our scientists, 24 billion years ago, there was a little dot of energy. And the energy is and was less than the size of a pea. So here's our little pea. And then the Big Bang happened. And the pea got a lot bigger very rapidly. Now, what's life's program? What's its protocol for taking this highly condensed, kind of very tiny mass of energy and creating the entire multiverse of everything that we know? And it's still getting bigger. What's life doing over a 24 billion year period to take something this small into something so big that we are many times the size of a pea, and we are less than a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of all that life has been up to in this period of time. And life's protocol seems to first be get bigger, to create space and create time. Time is the markers or the measurements along with space as something gets bigger. So to get bigger, and in doing so, create space, create time. Now, as things get bigger, there occurs a specialization process. So within this bigger mass, you have stuff that's out at the edge, and you have stuff that is at the center. And the stuff that is out the edge behaves differently than the stuff that is at the center. So you have a specializing protocol where as space and time gets bigger, whatever it was that was less than the size of a pea gets to adjust, evolves, changes as it grows. So certain things, for example, cool off with time. But things are cooling off at different speeds. So you have a cooling off period, but at different speeds and in different ways. And so, just like if you were to take a hand and separate it, and then have different parts of the hand get cooler than other parts of the hand, you'd start to develop a specialized, unique pattern of energy, where this now looks and feels and behaves differently out at the edge than at the beginning. And this expanding process continues and continues and continues. And each bit behaves and evolves a little bit differently because it's in a slightly different environment. And so the one becomes more and more distinct. As it becomes more and more distinct, then you have a process where its distinctions then come back into relationship with one another. So you can think of, the Earth's core, where you have this heat, and as things are really close in the core, it's kind of a more cohesive and homogeneous soup. But as it cools off and moves further away from the core and interacts with different parts at the extremities, well, then that core specializes into different minerals, and becomes more distinct. And having become hardened and more distinct, we then combine them in different ways to create new things and new things and new things. So if we were to summarize what life has been up to over the last 24 billion years, we could say that life is about getting bigger and creating time in the process. And that, this very hot core energy, as it expands and gets bigger, evolves and mutates and experiments and iterates into more and more distinct particles in the cooling process. But some things are cooling faster than others, and so if you then combine something that's hotter with something that's cooler on that particular continuum, even if it started out the same, it's now it's two distinct patterns of energy. And so you could say that life expands and creates then an expansion of space and time. And then secondly, it becomes more and more distinct in its patterns. So it's one pattern diversifies into a whole host of different patterns of energy, where you can now look at this type of atom is different from this type of atom, and the relationship within this atom is different than the relationship within that makes up this other atom. And that once you have specialization, it's like you take the one and you turn it into 10. But these 10 specialized forms that are now bigger and further apart can now be combined to create 100. There's 10 different ways to mix 10 different things. So you've now got 100 patterns of energy. And then the 100 patterns of energy can combine and combine to create, I think it's 10,000 patterns of energy. So, well, so you now have 10,000 distinct patterns of energy. And if you combine 10,000 distinct patterns of energy, you can get, easily millions and billions and trillions of distinct patterns of energy. And so that's what life is doing. It's taking one thing that's very small, expanding it, creating large volumes of matter, space, and time. And then as those things randomly or in some order interact with one another, they combine to create new patterns of energy. And those new patterns of energy, and all of the patterns of energy, could be said to compete to create efficient, sustainable relationships. Relationships that work, that are sustainable, that hold together. And that these things just continue to combine and combine and combine in an iterative process that goes on, as far as we know, for trillions of years. We're only in the first 24 billion years, but as far as we know, there's 1 trillion years ahead of us. We're only just getting started as a multiverse. So life then is creating unique patterns of energy on an exponential curve. It's doing it very fast because it's doing it exponentially. So we have more and more patterns of energy being developed all the time. And as these patterns of energy develop over time, when they interact, some cancel each other out. Some consume one another. Some combine and synergize. And in doing so, there is an evolution of intelligence. Because the patterns of energy that die out, the patterns of energy that don't make it, are recycled into patterns of energy that are more competent and sustainable. So you have an evolutionary process that lends itself towards complexity. You get more and more complexity. You get more and more variety. And you get more and more efficiency. The most complex and the most efficient pattern of energy, which tends to go hand in hand. You could just say the most efficient pattern of energy. But the most complex patterns of energy tend to be more efficient than simple forms of energy. And so if you think of if you think of a company, that wants to, let's say, invent a nuclear power plant. There is no nuclear power plant. You want to invent a nuclear power plant. Well, you could have one person rather inefficiently study and learn all about physics, study and learn all about nuclear physics, and they may well be dead long before they learn all there is about physics and nuclear physics. But you could have a person do all of that and then invent steel mills and then make the steel and pour the concrete and do the architecture and get the permits and all the things. You could have one person do a nuclear power plant. But because it's too big of an enterprise for one person to succeed with before their death without the help of others, that person is going to scale down. They're not going to get to that. So for something as complex as a nuclear power plant to emerge in the ecology of our cult, it requires thousands of people over decades to participate, to create something that complex. But in some ways, it's more resilient. I mean, certainly nuclear waste is incredibly resilient. It's not going to go extinct anytime soon. But it's a highly complex process. And if you think of mammals consuming plants, the mammals are more complex than the plants, and they consume the plants. It's not normally the other way around. Though some plants, of course, consume and feed on mammals that they poison, and then the mammal fertilizes the plant. So life is generating more and more variety every year on an exponential curve, and some of those forms of energy synergize and partner to become more complex. And those more complex and more efficient and more intelligent forms successfully consume the less complex and less intelligent forms. And in doing so, the complex forms continue to evolve into more complex forms. And so it goes. So you could say that life has started with this simple little pea and has now, in our universe alone, created more than 1 billion life-affirming planets, of which we are one. And amidst literally tens of millions of different iterations of creatures and creaturehood on this planet, that human beings are among the more complex organisms that we know of, perhaps the most complex. And so we are consuming energy that is less complex: papayas, carrots, rabbits, fish, whatever it is that we're eating. And we're also consuming plants and natural ecology and things of that nature. And we're creating houses, cars. We're creating all kinds of energy patterns, all kinds of life forms, we could say. Because certainly everything is part of a system that is in moving. Even nuclear waste is energy that is very, very slowly turning into another form of energy. So all of life is a pattern of energy that is evolving into another pattern of energy that is tending towards complexity, that is tending towards efficiency, that is tending towards diversity. So we have diversity, complexity, efficiency. And in the human drives, we have the drive to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse. And so within the subset of evolution that is cultural evolution, because we have the ecological evolution, we have within that the evolution of the physical body of humans, and then we have humans' creation, which is not separate from nature. We are emerging as plants out of Earth's body, as energy forms out of Earth's body. We're not separate from the ecology. If you have any doubt, just try to block off the flow between you and nature. It's like blocking off the flow of an artery. If you block off the flow and stop the breath, that is your artery, with life, with your larger ecology, you'll be dead in a matter of minutes. And what will happen with your body is it will be consumed into the ecology. It will feed. Blood has nitrogen, bone has phosphorus, etc. You will feed the ecology as you dissolve back into it as a body. But while you exist, you are feeding on the ecology. Now, what's life up to? With obviously creativity. And what an accomplishment. We've got diversity, which builds to creativity, because the more paints or blocks you have to play with, the more interesting constructions you can build. So you have creativity, you have diversity, you have efficiency. Life rewards efficiency. If a lion is chasing a pack of zebra and one of the zebras doesn't run as efficiently as the other zebras, it lags behind and becomes the meal of the lion. In doing so, the inefficient runner is removed from the DNA and genetic pool of the zebra, and the fast runners remain in the genetic pool of the zebra. And in the process, the lion helps to trim off the slower and less efficient versions of life within the zebra herd. And the faster zebras continue. And similarly, the zebras, as they continue to evolve, keep running faster with each generation because the lion is pulling out the slow genetics and rewarding the fast genetics. And so the zebra is running faster. As the zebra herd runs faster and faster, the slowest of the lions can't make a kill and die. And the zebras remove the slow lions from the lion herd. So the lions are removing the slow zebras from the zebra herd, the zebras are removing the slow lions from the lion herd, and as a result, you have a feedback loop that encourages the lion herds to go faster and faster and the zebra herd. So you have a protocol that's training for efficiency. So you've got creativity, diversity, which leads to creativity, and efficiency. And you have diversity lead to efficiency because what nature likes to do is mutate. It creates diversity by mutation. And every mutation is an experiment with a very open judge. Basically, if you live, and if you do well, and if you mate well, then your experiment, your pattern of energy continues. And if you don't, then your pattern of energy dies off. And so diversity leads to efficiency because when you mutate in both directions. The mutation program that says, we're going to change every iteration by 2%. So if we produce 100 humans, we're going to produce 2 humans that are different. Could be the code. They're going to be different. Now, every difference is ecological. Well, whether a difference is good or bad depends on its environment. So if 2% of humans are born different from the other 98%, let's say one of them is born to be able to tolerate heat without feeling discomfort, and 10% more than the other 98%. And it happens to be a desert. Well, that person is going to do much better, is going to perform much better, all things being equal, than the other 99% of the 100 babies born. Now, the other person may mutate towards doing better in cold weather, but doing worse in the desert. And they're born in a desert. But they do particularly poorly and have problems, etc. Well then, what about if they had been born on the North Pole? Well then, the mutation that lended itself towards being cold and doing well in the cold would perform better rather than the one in the desert. And so nature and life has a protocol of mutating a small percentage of whatever it replicates with a difference and creates diversity. That diversity over time engages with the environment. And some of the diversity does very well, and some of the diversity does very poorly. And the diversity that does poorly dies off, and the diversity that does well thrives, grows, and procreates. In the process, things get better and better at adapting to a specific environment. They become more and more specialized. So the 100 humans that were born in the North Pole, the one that likes the cold does well there, and the one that likes the heat does poorly and dies off. In the desert, the 100 people that are born, the one that likes the heat does well, the one that doesn't like the heat, that likes the cold, dies off. And so the desert people become more and more different from the Eskimos in their skin, in their body, in their temperament, in their knowledge, etc. So this is how life creates diversity. Because when you have diversity you create a bigger possibility field for life. You could say that life is in the business of creating a bigger and bigger possibility field, which leads to a bigger and bigger probability field, which leads to a bigger and bigger actual field of what is. And that the innate drive to feel good and to avoid feeling bad that we all embody means that we're constantly trying to relate to one another and our larger ecology more efficiently, more intelligently, to create more well-being for less energy. We don't want to spend time hand laundering our clothes if we can throw them in a washing machine. And so we develop a technology that we become competent at. And within human beings, this protocol of diversity and creativity expresses itself in a maturation process that's useful to understand. So the maturation process begins with an infant and sympathy. And that's the infant. And it moves to the opposite, which is antipathy, which is the adolescent. Now, if a child has the brain ability to develop, and if a child is not traumatized into such shock, fear, and of growing up and of confronting the authority figure, they will move biologically towards adolescence, towards antipathy. If a child is traumatized too severely, they will move into pleaser and enabler of their abuser, their parent, their cult, their boss, and will not move into the adolescent state. But the adolescent state is the state of rejection and antipathy of what is. The child state is the state of unconditional acceptance and sympathy for what is. So you could say that what life does is it sets up a power dynamic where the infant is very small and the cult and the family is very big. And the infant depends on the cult and the family to survive, to feel secure, for love and belonging, for validation. And the cult generally provides it, after a fashion. And so the child downloads the best program that cult knows. That's the program that has kept that cult alive for X number of years. So the child downloads the program. They learn the language of the cult. They eat the food of the cult. They learn the biases of the cult. They learn the racism of the cult. They learn the chauvinism of the cult. They learn the work ethic of the cult. They learn the dating protocols of their parents, and they just download it. No questions asked. Here's a complete hard drive load up of what we're using at the current time. And the child does not question this. It receives the download and becomes a clone. However, a clone doesn't help much with evolution. If you had perfect clones that were in a childlike state, then there would be no human evolution, because the parent would say, this is the way it is. The child would say, okay, would copy the parent completely, would grow up and then tell their children this is the way it is, and the copy would be perfect. There would be no evolution. So what happens as the child moves into adolescence is the adolescent differentiates themselves from the parent, the government, the cult, and looks critically, as if from the outside. It severs and looks from the outside and says, "You're a hypocrite. You're a liar. You don't know what you're doing. That's dumb. That's useless." The adolescent looks critically at the world and their cult, at their school, at their government, and realizes it's filled with flaws. And so they reject everything based on this and this and this and this. And they point out the adolescent's job basically is to debug the code of the cult, which is filled with bugs. It's filled with incompetence, corruption, and bugs. And so the adolescent has to experience everything that's dysfunctional about the cult in order to, stew on it and notice what they are, so that the adolescent can reject those flaws. But the adolescent is part of a polarity. And so the adolescent rejects everything. Everything's dumb, boring, stupid, etc. But it has a list. This is the important job of the adolescent, is to note every single flaw. That you didn't do that right. That was dumb. This isn't right. But the adolescent doesn't normally know what to do with this other than to reject the world and society, etc. And so it's a stage. But if one is to move towards some degree of being a grown-up, to be a grown-up, you've got to function. To go from adolescence to growing up to some sense of basic adulthood, you've got to function. So you've got to reject the worst of what is and accept the best of what is. And so it's a sifting process. You look through it and you say, I really didn't like my mom and dad's marriage. Well, what didn't you like? Did you not like that they had bodies? Did you not like that they ate tofu? What didn't you like about it? And so you list, this is what mom would do to make dad feel miserable. And this is what dad would do to make mom feel miserable. And then they both felt miserable most of the time. So what you reject is this bit, saying and doing this for this reason, to this type of person in this way. And then the response here. But the fact that they had bodies was fine. The fact that they knew how to drive was fine. The fact that they spoke English was useful. So I'll keep the English language. I'll learn how to drive. But I will not pick an incompatible spouse. I won't make a woman financially dependent and desperate. I will engage in a way that helps a woman to grow and be her own person. And so I will engage this way and not this way. And so here we have a movement towards synthesis. Sympathy, antipathy, synthesis. The synthesis of the best of what is, the best of the past, and the rejection of the worst of what is, the worst of the past, in a new synergy, something that has never existed before. That is a conscious iteration. It's an ego's version, an identity, my pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. It's mine. I threw this out, I brought this in, this is my pattern of energy that is unique. It's combining the best and rejecting the worst of both family systems. Now, when you have cloning, where basically there's so much abuse in the house that as you try to move to rejection and antipathy, you have such insecure parents, governments, teachers, etc., that basically they threaten to kill you socially, financially, emotionally, mentally. They threaten, genocide if you go through antipathy, if you point out their flaws. In a shame-based cult where flaws deserve to be punished, That's the message of shame. If you make a mistake, you're bad, and bad people need to be punished. If you're in a shame-based cult, then all of the imperfection that's all over the place is too dangerous for those in power to acknowledge, because then they're bad and deserve to be punished. So instead, what they do is they attack those weaker than them from a position of power to make sure that nothing can be pinned on them by, a whole bunch of fake accounting socially and otherwise, so that all the inadequacies of the parent, the teacher, the government, get basically dumped on the child and punished. And it's too expensive to say, well, maybe you did the wrong thing over here, Mom. That's why we're late. It wasn't because of us. It was because you insist on drying your hair for 20 minutes and don't have a clock and this and that. That's why we're late, Mom. But if that's met with too harsh of a punishment, the adolescent doesn't develop, and then the synthesis of the adult doesn't develop. So one dimension or definition of an adult is a unique pattern of energy that is more intelligent than the parents' energies. So the parents have a pattern of energy of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being on the female side and the male side. And if you look at both of those systems and you reject the worst of those systems and you embrace the best of those systems and you add to it, from an evolutionary level, you are now an adult. You're now a distinct individual human being, which has to meet a few criteria. Number one, you've got to be able to meet your human needs. To be an adult, you've got to be sustainable. It's no good being a unique form of human being that collapses and is erased evolutionarily because your boss lost their temper or something like that. So to be an adult, a successful adult, you give back to life a pattern of energy that has survived, that is secure in that survival, that experiences love and belonging. These are each human being's needs, that has self-esteem, in which you have developed your gifts, in which you've then brought those gifts into the world and created abundance for yourself and other people. And then you participate in something that is bigger than yourself, that is in service to the planet, to the species, to a cause, to a group, even to a family. To create a family in a really healthy and effective way and serve that family, to create a synergy with other people that is bigger than yourself and serve that is a human need. And so that completes the cycle. If you have created a unique life that rejects the worst of your father and the worst of your mother, that embraces the best of your mother and the best of your father, that embraces the best of your cult and culture, that rejects the worst of your cult and culture. That's the first step. In a unique, sustainable way that is reproducible, that can hold its own, so that you are surviving, secure in your survival, experience love and belonging, have self-esteem, have developed your specific talents, are bringing those talents into the world to create abundance for yourself and other people, and are now a part of something bigger than yourself. You've now delivered to life what she gave you energy for. Because life is constantly investing itself in energy patterns. And life wins that lottery because many of them die out. 95% of every cult in human history is extinct. 95% of every language in human history is extinct. So things are dying out. You serve life by taking energy in, developing it, and giving it back to life, delivering a unique pattern of energy that is life's return on investment. That is more intelligent than the form of energy that you got. So an adult then has intelligence. An adult is more efficient at organizing and investing energy, time, money, and natural resources than the family that gave birth to them. It's more efficient at utilizing time, money, and natural resources to create sustainable well-being for themselves, those around them, and the ecology that is our host body. That is an adult. I don't know about you, but I really enjoy knowing what an adult is. I enjoy having a marker of looking at where I am in the process of becoming an adult. Because it's somewhat organic, meaning if you put yourself in a completely new situation, for example, if you take yourself and put yourself on a lunar lander and land on the moon, the pattern of adulthood, of energy that helped you survive and feel secure, etc., on Earth may not work up there. And so you're not an adult in that context. You may be an adult in your flows and in your line of work, but if you suddenly enter a sumo wrestling ring, you do not know how to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging, etc., and to transcend in that environment. And so you can regress someone, and this is a common theme, where if you take someone who feels mature and competent in a given environment and then slam them into an environment in which they have no experience, in which they can't cope, then they often regress to a childlike state of tell me what to do, someone who knows what they're doing. And if nobody knows what they're doing, then they die, and that unique life form ceases to exist.